What's the dumbest mistake you've seen an incompetent coworker make? I worked as radiation protection tech at a power plant that was refueling. My job was to sit outside of a contaminated area, and if anyone wanted to take something out of the area, like tools, etc., I had to make sure it didn't have any radioactive particles on it. To do this, you wipe the tool with something like a tissue and then hold the tissue up to a machine called a frisker. If the needle on the frisker goes above a threshold, then the tool has to be cleaned or left in the area. One day I came back to relieve a guy who had been sitting outside the area for 2 hours. He tells me there's been no issues and everything was cleared. I look at the frisker, lean over, and turn the machine on. Story 3. I used to work as a pharmacy tech. Most antibiotics for kids come as powder in a bottle. We add distilled water to make it liquid upon receiving prescriptions, as the solution only remains stable for 10 to 14 days depending. One day, a father drops an amoxicillin prescription for a child. Usual questions are asked: age, weight, allergies, type of infection, desired flavor. Product is prepared and given to the father. He leaves. 2 hours later, he comes back, says the medication smells funny. I think, duh, medications often do. But I still smell the waft and the scent with my hand to my nose, and he's right. Something is off. I give the bottle to the pharmacist. He agrees and makes another bottle right away. The original antibiotic bottle smelled like straight up alcohol. In a lab, we keep multiple solvents for many uses: water, simple syrups, mineral oil, ethanol. One of the techs added ethanol to the antibiotic instead of water. And we were all flabbergasted as how the mistake could have occurred because all the solvents are 1, a different size, 2, of different label, color, and 3, identified in huge letters. We identified the tech guilty of that mistake and they couldn't even say how that error occurred. Story 4. Nearly leaving a child behind on a field trip. We took a large group of 4- and 5-year-old children to visit a farm, petting zoo / pumpkin patch. We had 3 vehicles. I was in charge of my own group, but I noticed one of the other teachers was being very lax in her supervision for most of the trip. When it was time to leave, I loaded my children on the bus with some other adults and did a head count / attendance check. Before getting on my bus, I noticed that the other teacher had climbed onto her bus and sat down before any of the children boarded. She walked on first and had the kids follow her. I almost let it go, but gut instinct told me she wasn't counting her students. Once they were all boarded, I walked back and climbed on her bus. She seemed irritated when she realized I was checking on her. I was not a supervisor or anything, just a fellow teacher, so she didn't answer to me in any way. She said something like, "We're all good, let's go." I knew how many were in each group, so without answering her, I did a quick count. Sure enough, we were missing one. I ended up leaving the bus and going to find the kid myself. He was still in the playground with children from another school. When we got back to the bus, the other teacher blamed the kid. She said he wandered off. Really, she is the one who gathered the group and left the play area, meaning she is the one who wandered off. She was so upset when I went to the administration about the incident. Story 5. I worked for a nonprofit that hired a guy in fundraising purely for his Rolodex, and they couldn't care less about any of his job functions as long as he kept bringing more rich people to fundraiser parties. Well, when the pandemic hit and we were forced to go remote, it became clear how incompetent he was with technology, and how he'd been coasting for years in the office by sticking to phone calls instead of email. We had our first major online fundraiser coming up, and I warned my boss that this dude had no idea how Zoom even worked. Never muted himself, camera up the nose, treated it like watching a YouTube video. But again, he was the guy inviting all the rich people to the event, so they didn't want to lecture him about a computer program and hurt his ego. Then, in our massive 200-plus person Zoom event, he set his laptop on the bathroom counter and proceeded to take a shirtless, nasty old man dump complete with grunting, splashing, and squelching. It was so loud it drowned out the speaker. They had to end the event early because they had no way to mute him, and it kept going for a full 2 minutes with no signs of stopping. I nearly threw my laptop out a window that night. Wait, but did he know he was on camera? I mean, he might be a victim here. If he did, I mean, honestly, like, the balls on this guy. Everybody, 200 people, let's all collectively watch me use the restroom here. That's an embarrassing, vulnerable moment. I have questions. Story 6. I worked in a veterinary hospital for a good number of years. One day, unknown to me, some little girl had found a dead, dying seagull with her family and brought it in to see if we could help it, but it has passed by the time they arrived. Our veterinary technician took said bird for disposal, but was too busy to deal with it then, like put it in the freezer. 1 minute tops with labeling. So instead, he just packed it to box with the dead bird into our storage area with dozens of similar boxes, and he just leaves it there. Days go by while he is still working, I should add, and I come back on shift to something is seriously rank in the office. Customers are complaining. No one knows what could be the cause of it, but I eventually find the box buried beneath other supplies. I walk up to my head receptionist and say, Seagull? And watch the absolute fury grow in her eyes. The tech did not last long after that. Story 7. When I was in the Coast Guard, there was an incident where a vessel called in what they thought was another vessel in distress, but couldn't be sure and couldn't raise them on VHF. The watch commander kept refusing to launch the rescue boat until he had more details. Like, dude, this is far north. The life expectancy of a person in the water without a survival suit is measured in single digits of minutes. We can get more details when the boat is en route. The exact position of a bunch of floating corpses is of limited value. After 3 or 4 minutes, I just said, F it, and launched the boat. It turned out the suspected casualty's radio was banjaxed, and they were otherwise fine. Their boat just had a very low freeboard and looked a bit sinky. I fully expected to be crab canned for it, but I wasn't. The old man had a long conversation with the guy about how nobody will ever find fault with sending an asset to a possible false alarm. But failing to send an asset to a real emergency is, well, it's not good. The dude had previous before I joined for shrugging off a red flare report as a hoax. 2 people died in that one. Story 8. A guy was using the overhead crane in a machine shop I worked in. It had 2 hooks on it. One was raised right to the roof. The other was lowered and beside another guy's machine. The guy using the crane was looking at the hook by the roof and mobilized the crane. He was wearing earmuffs and the shop is loud AF, so when he started almost killing everyone in the line of machines with the other hook, he couldn't hear the rest of us screaming. The hook almost threw the first guy into his lathe, hit the next guy's toolboard, flipped over to the side he was on, almost put him into his lathe, rinse and repeat for the next 3 machines. When it bounced over the last one, it grabbed the A-frame that held all the bar stock and started lifting 30 to 40 tons of steel off the ground. Someone finally made it to him and slapped the controls out of his hands, and that was his last day on the job. Story 9. Patient with late-stage Alzheimer's had been progressively getting sicker. Used to be a walker and wanderer, eventually just got a bit sicker each day and bedbound. Everyone kept giving his meds like normal. He ate less, tummy became distended, he was found unresponsive in his bed, apparently vomited, and died. The nurses aided were in charge of cleaning him up. One went to clean the strange vomit that came out of his nose. She wiped it with her gloved hands. It was crap. He had crap coming out of his nose. He apparently had a bowel obstruction and it got so bad to the point that everything backed up and he was vomiting up his own undigested food and fecal matter. A simple monitoring of his distended stomach would have revealed that. A simple charting of his last bowel movement would have revealed that. Nobody could find when his last bowel movement was, and the charting that should have been done apparently hadn't been done in months. It could have been caught. He didn't have to die that way. All those little negligent mistakes eventually led up to one gigantic mistake. Story 11. I managed a construction security team for a beachfront project, which required 24-hour on-site patrol. So I ran the daytime team and my friend ran the graveyard shift. As it was a dredging operation, we had to have 2 guys posted near the shore to make sure civilians weren't running into the area. So think of a square on the beach with a guard on each corner. Well, one night we couldn't find one of our night guards, and his phone was sending calls to voicemail. Turns out he had set up a folding chair in the sand at 2 a.m. and fell asleep at post, only to get wrecked by high tide an hour later. His phone and everything in his pockets were destroyed, and he went home soaking wet without telling anybody. I don't think he was reprimanded, as I'm sure the shame should have been enough punishment. He later got fired, though, for driving a company ATV off a sandbank and getting it stuck. Story 12. Not a coworker, but a fellow culinary student. I am in college one day a week training in advanced cooking. 2 weeks ago, we were making sugar sculptures from isomalt. We had to bring in blow torches to use to weld parts of our sculpture together. Our instructor was explaining step by step what to do with the isomalt and explained that when we had our pieces molded and cooled, he would show us how to use the blowtorch. So a lot of us were busy molding and cooling our pieces before assembling our sculptures. One of the students who shares the station with me sort of jumped the gun and thought he could just assemble his sculpture without the instructor. He turns on his blowtorch, sets his sculpture on the surface covered in cling film and proceeds to just set fire to everything around him. At this point, I am roaring at him to stop. but he just brushed me off and screamed back, he knew what he was doing. Before we knew it, the cling film was on fire and the fire blankets were grabbed quickly. The instructor managed to get the fire put out, but dear goodness gracious, did it frighten the lot of us. The instructor chewed the student out of it for being so reckless. I actually can't believe what this student did and how he saw no danger. I really hope he chooses another career other than chefing. Story 13. I worked in a place notorious for having bad recruiters and hiring bad temps. They had this one guy on a 3-month lease, and we couldn't get rid of him fast enough in the summer of 2001. First, he claimed all these Microsoft certifications, and after a few days, we realized he didn't even know how to use a mouse or how scroll bars worked. So we put him on the worst detail. All he had to do was go to one of 20 popular websites and use a stopwatch to time how fast he clicked enter and how fast it took the web page to load. We were testing some web caching software. Then he had to go to another machine with the software and do the same thing. He had never used a browser, so we had to teach him how that worked too. The concept blew his mind, and we wonder how an adult had lived in 2001 who didn't know how a browser worked. We knew he lied about the certifications at this point, but he had 90 days we were stuck with him. Very quickly, however, he discovered how to find adult content and started browsing that instead of testing websites. This was in the days of Microsoft Internet Explorer 5 or 6, so of course they became infected with pop-ups and viruses. We'd catch him at it, and he denied it every time. We'd have to completely wipe the desktop and reinstall Windows only for him to do it again and again. We caught him doing it with other machines in the lab too. The guy literally had no impulse control, claiming the whole test lab was infected, and just absolute lies that a kid would tell who had no idea how computers worked. Thank goodness we never caught him in the moment, but I feared reviewing the lab security tapes should have gotten to that. You were browsing adult content again. We have told you way too many times that's against company policy. No, I didn't. I'm literally looking at you browsing adult content as we speak. That's not me. There's adult content on your taskbar. That was always there. You have a pop-up from lewd site name. That was someone else who did that earlier. Oh, you know, the hairy guy with the beard. There is no hairy guy with the beard who works in this lab. You have been the only one here besides me. I know I saw him. He browses the adult content all the time. Like mentally deficient 12-year-old, I was so glad to get rid of him. Story 14. I had a coworker who was a guidance counselor at 5 schools in district. She was supposed to work one day at each school unless she was called to a school for an urgent case. She would frequently call the school she was supposed to be at, stating she had an urgent case at another school. One day at lunch, she was talking about what was happening in her favorite soap opera. This was before VCRs, and the show aired long before the school day ended. The principal was sitting at our lunch table. He got up, smiled, and told her, "See me when you are done with your lunch." After checking, she hadn't seen more than a few kids per week for many months. Funny thing is, complaints about her work had gone down in that time. She was just a crappy guidance counselor. Story 15. I worked grocery for 12 years, and one day I get an in-house page if I could come to the receiving dock. I worked produce to assist the grocery manager. We had just got a grocery load in, and the driver hadn't used a load lock, a bar that goes across the truck if it's not a full truck, and we had 9 full pallets of product toppled over and broken. My job was to take pictures on my cell phone of the mess, and the grocery manager called up our distribution center to inform them of what had happened. We had to take the keys to the truck away from him as he was fired on the spot, and he had to find his own way home. And it was a 4-hour drive home from our store. The whole time he was bickering that it wasn't his fault, that they can't force him to supply his own load lock as he was an independent contracted driver. He did about $10,000 worth of damage to product, lost his job, and any future possibilities at driving a big rig for anyone in the state because he didn't want to buy a piece of equipment that cost $50, or even worse, he didn't ask our warehouse for one, which they would have happily loaned him. He'd be fined if he didn't return the lock back after his run. Story 16. I worked at a tech repair shop, or not sure how to call it, but we basically repaired laptops, PCs, printers, and the like. No TVs, not that it matters. This was ran by 3 older dudes, and one of their nephews worked there too. The dudes were pretty chill most of the time, and one of them was really cool, like all the time. The nephew was a moron though. He had seniority over me, but they trusted way more than they did him, despite being there for more than a few years and despite him being a close relative. So one day the chill dude has to take a printer to the company that was like 2 hours of driving away. And since it was the nephew's task to test the printer properly, he asked him like 10 times if he had tested it. The nephew said he did, just 5 minutes ago, and that it worked. Of course, he did not test it, and did not work when he hooked it up to the company. Needless to say, the chill dude went ballistic on him. Shortly after that, he got fired because of many, many similar mistakes he had made. All he had to do was test an effing printer. It was like 5 minutes of work. Story 17. Copied from a previous comment. Nobody will ever beat out Katie. My friend Katie effed up everything, and I mean everything. She couldn't count change without giving a 50 instead of a 5. She couldn't wash dishes without breaking a few. She couldn't order milk without accidentally ordering 200 gallons more than we needed. We only needed 4. She flooded the kitchen 4 times. She set it on fire twice. She could not be trusted to close. Not close by herself. She couldn't be trusted to close at all. Minor things too, like if you were doing a giant pile of dishes, she'd wait until you were done and super happy about being done to say, "Oh, there are these dishes too," and then just dump them on you. She would spend so much time wiping down the clean tables that she wouldn't get to the ones that were actually messy. If you bummed her a cigarette, she would take it as open permission to steal as many cigarettes as she wanted from that day forward, and then go into your stuff and leave your stuff a mess in the process. And then, when you went to have a cigarette because Katie almost poisoned someone by somehow mixing up the detergent and the caramel for the 7th time that day, hey, you'd be out of cigarettes. I genuinely don't think she was lazy or effing up so we do her work for her. She just couldn't not F up. Just every possible way a person could F up, she'd zoom in on it and then do it 3 times each time, saying that she didn't know about it. Simply one of the most hopeless individuals I have ever had the honor to meet in this lifetime. They did have enough to fire her, but every time they did, her mother would come in and yell at the manager. And then he'd say, "Well, you know what, never mind, we'll just keep a closer eye on her." And you would keep a closer eye on her. And you'd follow her around the place keeping an eye on her. And then you'd know to do your actual job, and then you'd take your eye off of her for 15 seconds and boom! She'd take the fresh, newly baked cookies off that tray that was designated for the fresh, newly baked cookie rack and throw them in the trash because she decided that tray was for stale cookies, in spite of the fact that there was no such thing as a stale cookie rack. She was pretty nice, though, in spite of all that. I hope wherever she ended up, she doesn't burn it down to the ground. Story 18. Had a coworker land a plane on the edge of a runway, like the starting edge. Cracked a landing gear leg and bent a turbine blade in one engine. Then the scatterbrained old moron doesn't log it or tell anyone, just parks it and walks away. The next crew doesn't notice the damage because it's really not easily detectable. So they go flying and get a bunch of weird crap going on with the port engine. When they turn back, the effing gear wouldn't lock down. Fortunately, they were able to get on the ground and stop without making themselves or anyone on board dead. All we did was fire him. No reports to our regulator, no criminal complaint about his conduct. In hindsight, I should have made those complaints myself rather than leaving it to our management. Story 19. A few years ago, I was working in IT at a hospital. The following is a genuine account of what occurred. We'd received a call regarding a computer that was not turning on. So I went to one of the offices. This wasn't strange because we got them all the time. To put it mildly, 95% of those calls were due to user mistake. So I was bracing myself for the worst. However, not to this extent. When I arrive, I confirm that she is correct. The computer will not power on. I examine the plug first. It's affixed to the wall and it appears to be in good working order in the computer's back office. "So, what were you doing when this computer stopped working?" I inquire. In response, she states as a result, "Well, I thought it was too hot, so I used the water cooling option." As a piece of background, this model of computer featured a fan port on top of the machine that looked like a funnel. She pointed to this fan port when she said, "Water cooled? There aren't even any water cooled PCs here." When I returned to my desk with the now sloshing PC, my IT colleagues were bewildered as to why I had pulled the machine without permission, until I emptied the water into a garbage pail. Too long didn't read, someone who works with saving lives didn't understand that water plus computer equals a bad idea. Story 20. I watched a guy almost get crushed while working at Home Depot. They were setting up some racking for a display. The 20-foot tall orange racking with the side supports that weigh well over 100 pounds each. In my opinion, this should be at least a 4-man job, but it was common practice for them to do it with 2. To do the job, you have to get 2 of those sides standing up and then put the cross beams in the middle to connect them. So they get one side standing up, not bolted to the ground or anything, just balancing it on its tiny footprint. Then one guy was going to pick up the other side support while his coworker put the cross beam on the vertical support and then turned his back and started to walk away. If you have any concept of physics, you should know that this threw the weight of the frame off center. It started to fall forwards right for him. Fortunately, the other guy saw this happening and was somehow strong enough to catch it. No lessons were learned that day. I later watched as the store manager got reamed by the DM for trying to make me do some similarly stupid crap to build racking. I don't know if we can necessarily fault the coworkers for that incompetent mistake, as they were forced to do it. Incompetent managers, we're coming for you. And God bless that other employee for having the strength of 10 men. Story 21. I worked at a summer camp. Employees were usually college students, but one time we hired this guy in his early 40s. At the onset, it seemed like no big deal. He was just trying to act like he was 20. But slowly things got weirder. He kept getting in trouble for weird things. He got caught at least 3 times working shirtless with the kids. Like he'd be out canoeing and rip off his shirt and life jacket. Or he'd be laying in the middle of the park with no shirt on. No one was really comfortable with him because he seemed like he was trying to relive his glory days. Then we had an overnight training. It started at 9 a.m., went overnight to 3 p.m. the next day. It was a camp, so we set up our tents around the site for overnight portions. He was his usual self at the start of the day, but throughout the day he kept sneaking off to his tent for a few minutes at a time. He had set his tent up so much further away from everyone, so he'd disappear for like 10 to 20 minutes. He was acting weirder and weirder as the day went on. He just took off his shirt while the boss was talking and threw it in the fire screaming, "Woo-hoo-hoo!" He started talking about his ex-wife a lot. He was yelling at the birds. Things got really uncomfortable when he started talking about intimate relations. Around dinner time, he got up, ran to his car, and peeled out of the parking lot so fast that his tires were screeching. So we're thinking, okay, he's gone. Thank God, let's move on with our training. About an hour later, we hear his car flew back into the parking lot, and our manager started shaking her head, saying, "Oh my gosh, he's back." Soon after, we see homeboy running at top speed out of the woods and cannonball into the lake. He then gets out, buck naked, and walks over to where we are all sitting and starts doing the helicopter. He put his arms around both of my bosses and declares his love for them. At this point, we can all smell him. He reeks like a distillery. He asks us when we're all taking our clothes off and encourages us to get the party started. At this point, he's escorted out promptly. Someone went to clean up his tent and found he had been smoking out of pop cans and had a whole bunch of liquor bottles. The worst part, he was scheduled for a shift the next Monday at 11, and he texted us saying he would be late for a shift because he had a meeting with the boss. Needless to say, he didn't make it to the shift after that. Story 22. Pharmacy. I was a float pharmacist at the time. There was this lady that was a pharmacy assistant. All employees of the grocery chain besides pharmacists were union, dumb as bricks and extremely negligent, but hadn't made enough mistakes to get fired. You pull up the drugs that need to be filled from a queue, scan the bottle of the drug, and the label for the patient prints out. If the drug is incorrect, it will tell you that you're wrong and the label won't print. What I assume happened is she scanned the incorrect bottle, went to get the right one and scanned it, bent down to get a vial, then she opened the wrong bottle of drug, dumped the contents, opened the right bottle, dumped the contents. RX was for 200 tabs. Most bottles are 100. She left it on the counter to check, and I always opened the vial and look at the tabs or capsules to make sure it's right. Opened it looked right. Later, when the person came to pick it up, it was jostled from hanging in the pickup area, and I always open it to show the person what's there and another check for me as well. Lo and behold, 2 entirely different medicines are mixed together. I apologized and corrected it, but I was furious. She put a high dose of glyburide in the bottle and the person was on a low dose of glycoside. They could have had a critical hypoglycemic event because they were old and both meds make you release more insulin. I told her she wasn't allowed to put any bottles in recycling anymore. She had to leave everything she touched on the counter. I also couldn't ask her to enter prescriptions or do anything else because she was useless. She'd worked there for like 9 months, and despite close shadowing and training with the best assistants, she just couldn't understand anything. I told her manager, and I think she got written up, but she eventually just quit because everyone hated her and she was so effing stupid. Story 23. I worked in the parts department of a Cadillac dealership. Our manager quit, and the other parts guy, who had never had a decade managerial experience, was turned down. They hired a guy who supposedly had 20 plus years managerial experience, yet somehow didn't know how to use an office phone, nor use literally the most common software that close to 50% of the industry uses. Not only that, he'd never even heard of it. He also hadn't heard of the other software which close to the other half of the industry also uses. It wasn't so much a single mistake, but a never-ending series of mistakes that only accelerated in hilarious fashion. Once my coworker and I decided we were no longer going to train him to be paid significantly more than us. But absolutely the dumbest was that our GM didn't see the giant red flag when our manager couldn't figure out how to pick up a call from another extension, or to transfer a call after 3 months of working there. Story 24. I work in traditional real ale pubs. My best friend has now been a part of our close-knit team for over a year, meaning a year of experience in simplified cellar work, like changing casks and kegs, stock rotation, line cleaning, etc. Quite recently, she missed the vital flushing step. The line was taken out of the highly corrosive cleaning fluid and put straight into a full barrel. It was a beer our customers had been eagerly awaiting. Our use of vertical extraction means she instantly poisoned it all. The regulars practically threw it awake. She's charmingly ditzy, though usually only messing things up that cost less than €160. She's been sheepishly careful since the incident, which has practically erased her personality. Story 25. Chain pizza store. Saturday night, it was busy, as Saturdays usually are. This employee took it upon himself to unplug the router, disabling the store's internet and thus online orders without telling anyone. When I arrived Sunday morning, the internet was still out and I spent all morning trying to fix it. Finally, we called the ISP, and they sent out a tech on Tuesday morning. So Saturday night, and all Sunday, and all Monday, we were without online ordering. We probably lost about $3,000 in business. Once the internet was back up, I was able to check the networked security cameras and watched him unplug it and then later plug it back in incorrectly. When questioned about it, he lied, stating the cables got knocked out on accident. He was fired on Tuesday. Story 26. It's not so much traditional incompetence. This guy, let's call him Randall, was hired and oriented about the same time as me. Went through the same training class as me and bragged about all the super higher tier hacking he's done. He was 18 when he got hired for a sales and billing position at a call center. Randall wasn't making that many friends. Between the My Little Pony toys he's placed around his desk and how he'd yammer on about the next TV series he was going to do a fan dub of, Randall was pretty irritating. He was never on task and always spent more time talking about his special interests. Randall's sales were abysmal, probably because he couldn't connect to a customer even if they were literally conjoined at the hip. Like, I literally overheard him explain the plot of My Little Pony to an older client, late 60s, without realizing the man just wanted to pay his bill and didn't care about The Weird Pony Show. Because Randall's sales were abysmal, and he was a lead hacker, this man dead butt decided to go over to a different department's computer, log into said computer with his own freaking credentials, and straight up started going into his calls and ordering products these people never asked for. Sounds like fraud, right? It is fraud. Plus, the computers log all the times they're turned on and by who. If you're going to commit fraud, don't order things for customers using your own credit card. Without any hesitation, our account auditors went into these accounts, saw the credentials and his credit card numbers. Randall would give his card to coworkers to order food and had the audacity to wonder why he got fired. Story 27. I work for a retailer that drives forklifts. We have a lot of safety protocols for forklifts because they are dangerous AF and there are customers around. New guy gets his license to drive, proceeds to go outside the building with a lift and no spotter. Rule broken, number 1. District safety guy who happened to be visiting walks over to him. New guy then starts driving straight at him and the safety guy doesn't budge. He then proceeds to get off the lift and tell the safety manager to move. Brilliant. Side notes, a few weeks later after he was fired, his wife and baby mama tried to turn in his uniform and tools the company provided for free to get the money back that he told her he paid for them. Story 28. I work in a camera store. The coworker this comment is about worked in our lab that prints pictures and processes film. We have a machine that develops film automatically. All we have to do is load it and change the chemicals around every once in a while. For those that might not know, the film is light sensitive. It's exposed to light before it goes through the chemicals, the film is ruined and there won't be any pictures to make from it. My coworker was working on his computer when the film machine started beeping. He went over to the machine and opened it up while the film was running through it. This was bad because he was exposing film that a customer had dropped off and paid for. Our head lab guy started yelling at him saying, "Close it, you're exposing film!" I was nearby. I'm a sales worker and was just in shock as what I was seeing. The machine has a screen that says what the problem is. More importantly, it tells you when film is being processed. Why he felt the need to open it? I have no idea. He wasn't fired over this. In fact, he quit 2 days ago, but my manager was going to write him up for a few other things, and they were looking to replace him. The guy barely lasted a month. Story 29. I used to work at Whataburger, a fast food chain in Texas. It's similar to In-N-Out, and there were small incidents here and there. However, one incident genuinely made me want to quit. While working, I had to run food out to customers in the drive-thru, and at one point, the 3 guys we had at the deep fryer decided with their combined 2.5 brain cells that it would be a good idea to use the majority of the baskets to fry the chicken needed for other orders that weren't being made yet. However, the orders sitting in the preparation table were waiting on onion rings, which would have been cooking in the deep fryer had those three morons not used most of the baskets for chicken. We couldn't use the fry baskets because management chewed us out for it already. So while the three stooges were standing around, there were angry and hungry customers coming in from the drive-thru asking for their food. Unfortunately, we couldn't help the people behind them because our driveway is designed so poorly and goes from one lane and splits into two, both of which were completely occupied and the parking lot was full. The idiots decided to take it out on me for not putting the fries in the bags that didn't need them and tried to blame me for their incompetence. I couldn't say anything back because I was busy trying to calm customers down and at least assure them their food wouldn't come out cold. It was a solid hour of yelling before everyone got their food and things were finally running smoothly. After all that, the one manager who was there pulled me to the side to say, "I saw you on the cameras, and while everyone else was working, you were just standing there chatting with customers." Hey, excuse me, I was trying to keep them from eating us alive. Maybe don't have three guys on a two-man station. Maybe come out and actually do your job of improving customer experience instead of hiding in the office. Anyway, he said he'd write me up for it, but the next time I came into work expecting to sign some papers, the general manager said he had thrown it out because he knew I wasn't the one to just sit around while we're in a rush. Those three guys never got in trouble, though, for what they did, but the rest of staff sort of had a different attitude towards them. It doesn't sound too severe when you put it in words, but when you have customers yelling at you and three guys blaming you for not doing their job for them, as well as dining customers trying to get your attention or waiting for you, it gets frustrating, especially when the manager claims to have seen you struggling instead of helping decide to lecture you when he felt like it. Whoa, the struggles over at Whataburger. I've never had it, so can someone let me know if it's worth all the franticness? Story 30. So I worked home health. My client is moving to another area, and so I'm training my replacement as the new area was quite a bit of a drive for me. We go over loading and unloading my client from a wheelchair to a vehicle and from a vehicle to a wheelchair. Things are going good. I think the new guy gets it. All is looking up. We take my client to the doctor. Client says he wants the new guy to load and unload by himself, as I won't be there to supervise always. Makes perfect sense to me. I've been doing this job solo for years. New guy needs to learn to do it solo. Now is the best time since I am still there in case something does happen to go wrong. Effing go wrong, it did. Client tells me to go into the doctor's office and get him checked in while the new guy unloads. Honestly, I should have stayed with them the entire time, but the client was insistent that the new guy could handle things. We've trained this guy several times, and he will be fine, right? So new guy gets client out of the car and into the wheelchair just fine. He then backs the chair away from the car so he can grab the client's bag and close the door. Freaking F-wit forgets to put the brakes on the wheelchair on before letting go of the chair, so he turns to grab the bag and wheelchair is on a slight incline. Client starts rolling backwards down the incline. I happen to notice and dash out of the office with a quick F. Receptionist is out the door right behind me as the client is rolling down the parking lot. New guy is still digging in the car. So receptionist and I take off after the client. Dude rolls down the parking lot across the road and into a ditch. Long story short, client missed his doctor's appointment as we called a squad to have him checked at a local emergency room. We also had to talk to the local police. New guy lost his job, and I'm not sure, but I think he also lost his new CNA license due to client endangerment. Client is perfectly fine, no injuries. I ended up staying at that job for another 2 months, making the long drive daily while they looked for another replacement. New guy comes on and can't seem to grasp why we are so focused on making dang sure he understands how the wheels work on a wheelchair, until we tell him the whole tale of the runaway client. Story 31. I'm a wedding photographer. I've worked with many videographers alike, but then there's Chuck. This dude is entirely incompetent at his job. He's messed up my shots more than a few times, but whatever. I was working with Chuck for this big Catholic wedding that probably cost more than I make in a year. Chuck is walking backwards down the aisle for that dramatic feel and walks right into a giant decoration. It was this 5-foot-tall glass vase filled with glass beads and feathers. The thing crashes down during their ceremony, shatters, and beads go effing everywhere. It's dead silent throughout this entire church, and slowly the officiant continues. The bride and groom tried to ensure him that everything was okay, but the bride stared daggers at old Chuck the rest of the night. Story 32. His mistake cost him his life. Worked at a box corrugation plant many years ago, and this dude was notorious for taking shortcuts that would save him, like 5 seconds of time, not locking out the massive machine before entering or working on it to clear a jam or whatever. At the end of the massive machine was this lift thing of sorts. This is going to be kind of hard to explain. where its flattened boxes would one by one get stacked on as they came out of the machine. The lift thing, let's just call it that, it's like an oversized forklift looking thing, starts high, and as more flattened boxes accumulate in it, it lowers down based on sensors. Anyway, when you're going to go underneath the lift, you're supposed to lock the machine out. We all had a key, which disables that entire section of the machine, if not the entire machine, I can't recall exactly, and place multiple supports under the lift in the event it falls. It's kind of like jacks under a car. Anyway, Johnny Shortcut didn't do any of that, and the 2-ton lift dropped 10 feet right into his head, killing him instantly. Honestly, man, just take the 5 seconds at most, or however long it does take to put a key in it and turn it, and place the supports in there. Another 30 seconds, maybe? Witnessing the aftermath of that firsthand has stayed with me to this day. I heard the insanely loud crash from the other end of the machine, ran over, and there's Buddy, lying dead. And there's nothing I could do either. The lift malfunctioned. I can't move 2 tons. Simply called 911, and the crazy part was that since the lift was all effed up, nobody could get it to move, so dude was trapped under there for almost a full day until the company that made the machine was able to get it back online. All while knowing there's a dead guy only a few feet away from them. Story 33. Woman who was hired into a position that I was doing during the work for promised a promotion to section. I tried to stay positive, but she was an idiot. Came to me asking for help double-checking all the inventory that had been sent out over the past year, which was important because we were a pharmaceutical manufacturer that worked with controlled substances. The company was way behind the times, so while the current inventory was accounted for via a spreadsheet that I created and maintained, again, not my job, most of the records prior to that were just paper packing slips and sleeve protectors in a binder. So I help her get started and go back to trying to get my own work done. I then hear the commotion as she starts berating our manufacturing crew because the count is off by 13 cases. She's going absolutely apecrap, calling names and getting our operations director involved. He comes to me, calmly, and asks me to double-check her count. She's standing over me like a gargoyle while I flip through the binder until I get to one day's particularly large shipment, and I pull the very obviously multi-page packing slip out of the sleeve protector. She went white. Story 34. Back in the late 70s, I worked as a tree surgeon, and each morning the crews would assemble in the garage where the boss would hand out a 3x5 card with the address and instructions on what needed to be done. There was a guy with the nickname Ding who misread the address on the card, and they went to the wrong address. The instructions said, cut down all trees and shrubs in preparation for demolition work. Before the crew left, the boss said the house was being torn down for new construction, so the job was to clean out the whole lot. So Ding got the crew to the wrong address, and the foreman never checked the card. He just started cutting down big trees and shrubs and throwing them right in the chipper. The whole lot was cleaned of all the shrubs and trees by mid-afternoon, so they went back to the shop. The boss was hopping mad. He said, "Where the heck were you guys? I went out to the job and you weren't there." I wish I was there to see his face when the foreman told him they finished the job. I can't imagine coming home and finding that all the big 2-foot thick trees were gone, as well as all the flowers and every little bit of shrubbery. Gone. I think insurance must have paid them, but I didn't work for them much longer. Story 35. Worked hospital desk security during the start of the pandemic. A security bulletin had gone out about an escaped psych patient with a history of being violent and obsessive towards pregnant women. He'd gotten loose during patient transfer because he was being taken to a secure prison psych facility. We were told to be extra careful of who we sent to the OBGYN floor. He showed up at our desks and asked for directions to the maternity ward. Before I could make up an excuse to stall him, my coworker told him exactly where it was. I freaked out and said that was the escaped patient, thinking my coworker hadn't paid attention or something. And my idiot coworker says, "Oh, yeah, I know. That was definitely him, but I'm sure that'll be fine. The whole violent and obsessive towards pregnant women thing is probably an exaggeration. People can be so sensitive, am I right?" Like this idiot didn't even think to call security and let them know he was on his way up. I yelled at a different coworker to call security, and then I had to run and hurl myself into the elevator with him and distract him until security got to us. He was fired so fast. Edit, I just want to make it clear that this guy had escaped during a transfer from the hospital to prison. He was absolutely dangerous, and he did try to attack me while we were in the elevator alone. I don't know what exactly he went to prison for, but I couldn't bring myself to look it up. He looked dead in the eyes, though, like he had no soul. There's not a doubt in my mind that if I hadn't intervened and my other coworker hadn't called security, he absolutely would have, at the very least, attacked a pregnant woman or women. That was the only time I was actually happy to see someone get fired. Story 36. Someone working the fryers at McDonald's. He was new, but older than me, meaning over 18, and he used the gloves to put raw chicken in the basket. which is correct, but then he never took them off and proceeded to touch the cooked chicken with said gloves. Also, there's tongs specifically meant so you never touch the cooked chicken regardless barehanded or not. It also didn't help that he consistently tried to touch cooked foods with bare hands. This guy was at least 25 and didn't know about cross-contamination whatsoever. This McDonald's also had 2 managers that dated and frequently argued and or went to the bathroom at the same time. Yeah, they got caught by a coworker once. This McDonald's also frequently had problems with the fryers, and at one point they weren't cleaned for days at a time, causing buildup in the oil, and it caused smoke to emit from the fryer. And it wasn't steam or something like that. This messed my lungs up after only 3 hours and required me to get an inhaler that I still use. That 3-hour window was about 2 months ago. The McDonald's I used to work at has so many crap stories about workers, like how a new girl threw a paper towel into the sweet tea container thinking it was garbage. It was crazy there, and by far the most incompetent workplace ever. Story 37. I work for an attorney who does expat tax preparation. We had a friend's girlfriend working with us to help purge files and set up a new office. She stayed on because we needed a secretary. For some reason, she thought that we were equals in the office, that we shared the same responsibilities of answering the phone and email and filing documents, making copies. I'm a tax preparer, but she refused to be called a secretary. She had a good-intentioned email written to request from our clients their tax documents if they haven't already submitted them to us. This email was going to be sent to our entire client list. She went and added all of the clients and sent it, but instead of sending the email to ourselves with the client emails and BCC, it was a giant thread. All clients could see other clients' emails, and if someone responded to that email, all clients would be able to see that person's private financial information. So I had to immediately follow up with another email requesting them to disregard and delete the message. She got fired the next day, not because this was a stupid mistake to make, but because my boss and her couldn't see eye to eye on pretty much anything. She said she knows how to write a legal letter because she took a semester of law when she was in school. She couldn't. This mistake was, however, the straw that broke the camel's back. Story 38. This is fun. I had a guy at my last job in the greater Chicagoland area who somehow tore the top of his delivery truck off like a tuna can. It does happen, but as a driver, it's 100% on you for not being aware of the surroundings. This was in Chicago. Our warehouse was about 35 miles away in the suburbs. This is where the story gets better. Instead of calling the warehouse to tell them what happened and get a wrecker there or any help, he kept his mouth shut, finished his route, and drove the truck back on the freeway with the top half off. When he got back, he said he didn't know what or how it happened. In our line of work, that's called a lie. Claimed he must have hit a tree branch. I mean, dude, there's no effing way. He definitely tried to bring it under an overpass that was too low and was somehow able to back out and find a different way. I have no idea. I've never seen a boss so mad and confused. He got lucky that pieces of the roof of the truck didn't fly off the highway and F up people's vehicles. He was fired pretty much instantly, and this is a company that at the time was desperate for bodies to work. I showed up 15 minutes late to my interview, and I was hired immediately. Story 39. I used to work at a gas station, and this Einstein thought he would be clever by scratching and revealing the barcode for scratch tickets that we hadn't sold yet. He would do it to the first 3 or so of the expensive ones, scan them, and if he got a good winner, buy them. After the very first shift he did this, he got caught because, gee, who wouldn't notice that the ticket has a super obvious scratched off spot exactly over the scan bar? Someone even asked him about why they're scratched. He said he pulled them out wrong. He didn't have an answer for why the guy put them back if he did know. The boss, bless his heart, just caught him at the door the next day and told him to go home. Not worth the trouble of reporting him. I don't know what the punishment for that could be, but I doubt the idiot learned his lesson. If I had more time, I'd tell you about the girl who was at least 3 times dumber than him. Story 40. Let's see. The guy backed a plow truck into a lamppost hard enough to bend the salt spinner frame, then lied about it and said he reversed into a snowbank going 2 miles an hour. While cleaning litter from the highway shoulder, he came across a dead bird hit by a car, and when told to just toss it into the woods, he put down the tool used for picking up litter, took off his work gloves, and tried to carefully carry several pieces of shattered bird to the woodline. When told to make up a batch of 2-cycle gasoline, he tried to mix it in a salad bowl. He backed another truck into the garage carelessly, destroying a barbecue grill and the doors to a closet where we kept our tree cutting equipment, then tried to cover his tracks on that. He also nearly took my head off when he tried to start a 90-pound pneumatic ram while I was getting it positioned. He had to be watched whenever he fueled a truck because he tried to put diesel into the DEF tank, and probably 100 more things. He didn't last very long. Story 41. I've got 2. One used to work for FedEx. handling heavy freight. We also handled hazardous material. This was a fast-paced environment with forklifts going at full speed and mistakes happen frequently. It's kind of very hard to get fired. This particular facility had 170 different loading docks. Every single one has a camera so the supervisors can monitor all the workers. Coworker punctured a 20-pound hazmat box with his forks. He then proceeds to just chuck in the back of the trailer and not say anything. Had he just owned up to his mistake, he'd have to come in and watch a 1-hour corrective action video, which he would have gotten paid his normal hourly wage for. Instead, he was let go. 2. I started this temp job with a few friends for a well-known electronics company. Mind-numbing but well-paying factory work for a few stoners. The day we went in for orientation, the head of the safety department was instructing us. Pretty quickly into the meeting, unprompted, he said, "Guys, you'll have to forgive me. My wife really upset me tonight, so I took 3 Klonopin." Later in the meeting, he took us out on the floor for a few demonstrations. He was showing us different stuff on the forklift when he went to grab a bin full of parts from the top shelf with the forklift. He didn't have it all the way on the forks and he dumped it everywhere. Thank God nothing else happened that day. Story 42. Have worked in table games and casinos for many years. My first gig, the casino hired and trained 95% of the dealers from the local area to promote hiring in the community, whatever. When we first hit the floor, it was pretty obvious that some people just weren't ready. And with the regulations and rules in place, some people were quick exits. The most memorable was on a busy Friday night. It was around 3 a.m., and we were starting to thin out, so the pit manager came over and had 4 of us bring your lids up, which just means to bring the heavy metal lid out from under the table and put it over the chips to show that the table was closed or closing. Apparently, the one guy had not heard this term used before and proceeded to grab his lid and follow the pit manager out of the pit while holding it in front of him, leaving his table and all of the chips free to grab. It took a good minute before anyone saw him outside the pit, but he finally caught up with the pit manager, who absolutely lost his mind and ushered the dealer back to his table. Story 43. This wasn't really a work mistake, but it took place at work and only affected the incompetent worker, if that makes sense. So the dishwasher came in for a shift at a restaurant I was working at. I worked the fryer station. At the beginning of the shift, he ordered the fish and chips. I made it up for him and he put it in the takeout box and put it on top of his dishwasher. I thought that was weird, figured if he wasn't going to eat it right away, he would at least put it in the fridge, but it was busy and he just forgot about it and went home shortly after because my shift was over. Next day he comes in, walks up to me and says, I'm paraphrasing by the way, "I got really sick from that fish you made me." Wait, when did you eat it? When I got home from work. Wait, did you leave it on the dishwasher all night? He left the fish sitting on top of the dishwasher for 8 hours, then took it home and ate it. I tried to explain to him that you can't leave food out that long, especially on top of a dishwasher, which will send out steam every time you open it, and he just didn't understand. He believed I had somehow cooked it wrong and made him sick. Story 44. Okay, I have a good one. So I used to work with a guy at a job where we delivered building supplies. Think doors, trim, and windows. I was a driver, and he was my rider. Let's call him Pickle Butt. You'll see why very soon. So every morning I would get to work at about 4:30 and be on my way to deliver stuff at 5 a.m. Well, I get to work and I'm looking for Pickle Butt because it's 5 and we need to hit the road. Well, he's in the bathroom. He's been in there crapping his brains out for 30 minutes. So he finally comes out and gets in the truck. You should know he has stomach issues normally. I just forgot what it's called. He tells me, "Oh God, man, I got so drunk last night I feel horrible. And I keep crapping my brains out." So I asked him if we needed to stop to get him some water to rehydrate, and he says, "Yeah, don't worry, I already did. I drank pickle juice." This man proceeds to pull out a Sam's Club mega-sized tub of pickles, and he had drank every last drop. And I was like, dude, you understand that is like straight vinegar. No wonder your insides are liquid spaghetti. He insists to me that this is the hangover cure, which means that it rehydrates you. We were going 20 minutes down the road to get to our delivery spot, and he had me stop the truck no less than 4 times for him to crap somewhere. Then he goes again in a porta potty at the delivery site. Finally, on the way back, he asked me to stop again, and I tell him, "Look, go inside this gas station and get something to hydrate, man. Get some water." He comes back out with a large NOS energy drink and a large Mountain Dew and smashes them both as fast as he can. Then he tells me how the summer before, his kidneys shut down one day working out in the heat. I am beginning to understand why. The man gets hammered every day, then hydrates with pickle juice and energy drinks. Anyway, he continues to crap all day long, and after I finally buy him a big thing of water, he drinks it and says, "Wow, I feel much better. Must be the pickle juice kicking in." I wanted to punch him square in the face, I swear to you, and if you're thinking this is some 18-year-old kid who doesn't know any better, you'd be wrong. He was 43 years old with 2 kids, and his wife was a registered nurse. This is also the same man that didn't have any AC in his trailer because it broke, and his wife and kids were living in it all day while he was at work. Alabama summer is no joke. Well, he got $5,000 back on his taxes, and instead of fixing the AC so his kids don't have to sit in there in a 100-degree oven, he buys a new $1,000 phone. His current was only a year old. He buys a new gun, which he didn't even have the money to buy the ammo to go shooting. And then he tells his wife he's leaving her and spends the rest of it staying at a hotel for a couple weeks. Nice guy to have a conversation with, but not the sharpest tool in the shed. Story 45. I worked in retail sales. We had a quota, but if we reached a certain threshold over that quota, like 170%, we'd get a fat bonus. If you played your cards right, it was usually pretty attainable to hit that threshold, but sometimes you'd be cutting it so close, like 1 or 2 units away. The more tenured reps all knew what to do. Sell yourself and each other that item if it comes to it. No way you're going to give everything you've got every day for a month only to miss out on thousands by an inch, especially when your Fortune 10 company is making money hand over fist from both you and the customers. Regional manager is visiting the store, is chatting with the new guy about current numbers and behaviors they can improve to reach quota. New guy: "It's okay, even if I don't quite hit the mark, they said I can just sell myself a unit to get there." Pretty smart, actually. Manager: "But that's commission fraud, so we definitely wouldn't do that, right?" "Oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure. No, we definitely wouldn't do that." And guy got in trouble. Story 46. Not really a mistake. Incompetence? I don't know. Effing stupid? Oh yeah. Decades ago now, I used to work in aerospace with lasers. Lasers not visible to the human eye. A coworker, Mel, asked another coworker, Joe, to help him with some electrical issue. Mel overrode the safeties, the ones that would automatically insert a stop, a solid metal plate, in front of the laser itself if the safety curtain was opened while the laser was on. Joe saw the curtain open and naturally assumed the stop was in place. He almost looked down the path of the laser beam, the invisible pulsed laser beam that would burn the retina, creating any number of irreversible blind spots to his eyes. When I heard of this, I spoke with Joe and explained why it was important. Then I reported it to my supervisor. Why did I report it? Because I had signed paperwork that I would be responsible for laser safety in the lab. So had Mel and another coworker. No one could be in that room without one of us, not even our boss. Had to take an annual class and everything to be certified to work with them because there were bigger, higher energy lasers. Mel had broken company, state, and federal safety rules. He was transferred away from laser work within a couple of days and laid off when they had a chance a year or so later. We had a metal pointer to find the pulsing invisible laser. You adjust the height and position it so that laser pulses hit the very point of it. That way you know where to position the detector so it was centered. I used that. Other coworker used that. Mel? He used his dang arm. Showed me all the little burn marks he had to go with it. Mel was a jerk, too. His own mother sided with each of his ex-wives in the divorce. Dang, we got a little extra and unneeded lore on Mel. He's stupid, an idiot. Oh yeah, and he's a jerk and divorced 18 times. Story 47. A supervisor asked a new hire who had never worked with power tools to use expired grinding disc and a 4-inch angle grinder to file down some tiny plastic discs without showing how to work it. I caught the new hire inserting the expired disc into the angle grinder with the disc upside down with his bare hands. Not with the provided tool, his bare hands. Upside down, expired disc, bare hands. To file down 1-inch discs of plastic. I caught him before he turned it on, thankfully, and then handed him some sandpaper. Just so you know, grinding discs expire, and after the date they may shatter upon use, so it's a safety/OSHA violation. Putting it upside down with no tools means the disc isn't even securely fastened or in a functional position. Story 48. Here is one I feel bad about at a time when I was absolutely incompetent. I was around 12 years old, and I was working my first real job, part-time, as a dishwasher at a banquet hall. It was my first day, and we were getting things ready for the reception that would occur in a few hours. I was told to move the rolled-up rubber mats and set them behind the bar. I told them I didn't know what they meant by setting them up, but was told to just put them behind the bar. These mats are like rubber grip mats with holes so people don't slip. The mistake I made was I left them rolled up. A few minutes later, one of the older ladies is carrying out pitchers of hot water to put into the metal food containers. She trips over the rolled up mats. Both pitchers of hot water fall and spread over the floor she just fell on. She screamed and flailed until someone was able to help her. She ended up with several burns. I remember afterwards she told me she didn't blame me. I was a kid and by definition, incompetent. But I felt horrible. It's the only time I can think of where my incompetence resulted in someone getting pretty seriously hurt. It sticks with you. Story 49. Here's a list of some of the things I've seen dumb coworkers do. For several minutes, think about how to get an 8-foot pine stud into a 6-foot truck bed and ultimately fail to consider just turning it diagonal. Stack square boxes such that the end results look more like a pile than a stack. Shrink a pallet by taking items off the top, put them on the floor, go get another pallet, and then transfer the items from the floor to the second pallet instead of, go get the second pallet first and move the product directly to it. While idly playing with the drill, held the drill bit and pulled the trigger. Luckily, they were wearing gloves. Enter random information into inventory because they could not be bothered to rub the dust off the data plate, then neglected to at least attach a note cautioning the next person to need that information that it's wrong. Despite doing the same job every day for months, lacked any initiative whatsoever and always required specific instruction about what to do next. Story 50. I used to do commercial AV install work. We had one guy on our team who was just bafflingly dense, had numerous certs and a couple degrees, but just flat out dumb. Hard enough worker if you could point him in the right direction, though, and was an absolute marksman when it came to throwing lassos of wire through drop ceilings. Sounds silly, but I guarantee you a few people reading this will realize what a valuable skill that is. In that world, someone otherwise unqualified might be described as only being capable of pulling wire. So that's what I had him doing on the day in question. Pulling wire. Specifically, running a whole mess of wires from one meeting room to another, via conduit almost big enough for the amount of wire he had to pull. Did you know that wire lube is a real thing? It is, and if you ever need to use it, you'll wish it actually worked. It's just a crappy, tedious way to spend a day, but it's got to get done. Fortunately, like most of the terminally stupid among us, he was always in a perfectly fine mood and very happy to be doing whatever it was he was doing. Shortly after lunch, he came and found me and told me he was finished. We went to go check out the fruits of his labor, and I discovered one small detail slightly amiss. His response to my question about said detail was, "Oh, you wanted me to label both ends?" Yes, the fox and hound saved the day, but that question still echoes in my ears 10 years later. Story 51. Was a utility worker. Had a new tech with me teaching him the ropes. He bought walkie-talkies so we could talk to each other while we drive from job to job. He noted he got the same ones our power company in the area use. After working on a line with a third tech, we were driving to lunch with that tech. We came to work zone for the power company when over the walkie I hear their tech's conversation. "Hey, we have a few big trucks backed up in the other end here. Let me know when it's safe to let them through." I didn't think anything of it until I hear my coworker answer back, "All clear, send them through." Thank God the other power worker got on his walkie quick to stop the trucks. Me and the other tech made it to lunch about a minute earlier than the new guy. I told the other tech to pay attention to what the new guy says. New guy rolls us and I ask him if he was the one messing with the power company. He laughs and says yes. He then tells the third tech, without a walkie, all about what he just did. I called my HR and my supervisor that day and he was let go 3 days later. Story 52. I'm an assistant to the regional manager. Yeah, I know. At a retail brand selling electronics on airports. One day this guy comes to one of our shops, says he's from DHL and there's some issue with payments. He name drops a couple of people from corporate and pretends he's got my boss on the phone. The clerk falls for it and the DHL guy says he needs his money today or crap will hit the fan. So our clerk panics and instead of calling our boss, he straight up opens the cash register drawer and gives him most of the money, around 800 pounds. I assume DHL guy can't believe his luck, so he says that won't cover it at all. Pretends to be mad, and our guy freaks out, so DHL guy tells our clerk to open the safe, boss's orders. Again, he falls for it, but he cannot find the proper key because he does not have clearance for it. I wonder why. So get this, he effing breaks the safe open and just gives him all the week's earnings, and this was on a Sunday, so that was at least 10 grand. But get this, before leaving, he even got him to buy some Bitcoins for him using our mobile balance recharge system and our company's credit. I get there, he says, "I think I got scammed." So yeah, we had to let him go. Story 53. So I work at a hospital in Austin, and one of my coworkers, his daily task included washing, drying mops, cleaning restrooms, break areas, and doctor's lounge. And in order to enter pretty much anywhere, we have to badge in. And so this guy, Marcus, 34-year-old, acts very childish. I've walked in on him eating people's food in the break room and throwing away others. But what was really dumb of him was for the doctor's lounge, you need a manager's badge. And one time I helped him clean, I see him stealing sandwiches, sodas, ice creams, etc. And the thing about our badges, whenever we scan into an area, it tracks it. So my brother, a manager for our cleaning company we worked for, noticed a lot of in and out of doctor's lounge one night, and had also received an email of things being stolen, and he asked me if I knew anything. I said all I did was clean and then leave because I was called away, but I can check the camera right outside the door. And we see Marcus going in and out. He claimed he took out the trash, but all we saw was his trash cart had sodas in it. But under the trash bag was another bag filled with food and monsters. Sadly, all that happened to him was being moved to a new area of the hospital. But now no one takes him seriously, so that works out. I'm just like, how do you forget there are cameras everywhere? Story 54. Working at a ski resort, turning one of the conveyor belts lifts into the young learner area. The attendant helping kids onto the lift was supposed to hold his hand out and let the kids grab his hand. But instead, he tried giving them a push from behind at their center of gravity. Within a week, there's a picture of his hand on a child's butt posted to every local mom's Facebook group. The resort is getting hammered with one-star reviews saying we hired child predators and we're all going through mandatory extensive sexual harassment training. Then his name and face end up on the Facebook groups and he's getting death threats through Facebook, email, texts, and phone calls. The day after he told me all this, he quit his job and said he was moving to the other side of the country. Story 55. Worked for a kayak tour company where we were set up in a tent next to the river, with a storage container behind it where the boats were stored. In order to power the phones and laptops, we had a very large portable battery that would get charged at headquarters every night. There was a button on the battery for jump-starting a car, and if you used the button while charging a device, it would break the battery. The button was large and red and much more visible than the smaller buttons on the side used to charge devices. One of my coworkers broke the battery despite us being reminded by the manager several times not to press the button, which even had a cover on it. After this, they bought a new battery and put a sticky note and duct tape over the button. Somehow, within 3 days, the same employee forgot about the button and broke the new battery. It's important to note that these batteries cost about $300. A third battery was purchased and our boss gave him a very stern talking to. Again, he broke the battery days after it was purchased. He was then fired. He then came back to work the next day under the impression that the call he got from our boss was just another warning. The other worker and I discreetly text our boss that he's here. He gets a call, talks to the boss, and hangs up. And a few minutes later, he then says, "Dang, guess I got off work today," and leaves. We never saw him again. Story 56. I had a store manager who was so terrible, so inept and lazy that he drove me to quit retail and go back to school with a simple question. Don't you want to be like me? Dumbest thing this guy ever did starts with a prologue. Idiot somehow managed to get approval, or didn't need approval, to take a ski vacation over Black Friday. We worked it understaffed and without a store manager, and he got in a skiing accident and shattered his leg so bad he was out of work through Christmas and into the new year. The story? Idiot comes back and we find we have an issue with digital cameras and camcorders disappearing from our security lockup. Obviously, an inside job. Heck, obviously a specific assistant manager. But Idiot didn't see it because he was incompetent in every way. Under his direction, we moved all the low-cost cameras which weren't going missing to the lockup, where they started going missing. We only kept one empty box for each camera on the shelf, with each empty box locked in a security box. So I come out of the bathroom one day and I find the other assistant manager helping a limping idiot into the store. Apparently, while I was in the bathroom, some kid grabbed one of the camera lock boxes off the shelf and made a break for it. Idiot manager chased him, slipped, and reshattered his previously busted leg. Idiot manager is furious with me, insisting it wouldn't have happened if I had been on the floor instead of in the bathroom. Now, right away, anyone who's worked retail knows that's a mistake. We're not supposed to chase thieves like that. But the look on Idiot's face when I reminded him those boxes had been empty for a couple weeks on his order was truly priceless. Story 57. At the animal shelter I used to work at, this guy was cleaning out a cage which had a mom cat and her 6 newborn kittens. He was told to set up the cage exactly the same way it had been. Litter box in one corner, next to it, a plastic raised platform that stood about 12 inches high, and the cat bed underneath the platform. Though the kittens weren't super mobile yet, we kept the platform in so that mom could have a place to rest away from her babies if she desired. Guy worked a second job at another cat shelter and had almost 20 years experience as a cat owner himself. A couple hours after he cleaned the cage, coworker and I heard soft mewing. Went to check and he had to put the bed full of newborn kittens on top of the platform, and one of them had tumbled out onto the floor taking a foot-long drop. Fortunately, the kitten was okay. He just didn't have any common sense whatsoever, and for some inexplicable reason, he's still employed there. Story 58. She was a manager at a fast food joint I used to work at. A kid came in at 8 a.m., but his schedule said 8 p.m. The kid was also at fault, like, come on, the times are clearly labeled. Because she was a lazy POS who liked to sit down on the computer and do nothing, she let him stay. So when I got there at 5 p.m., they were leaving, and because the kid already worked, he is going home too. So we were short one person. I had to go back and forth between taking orders and washing dishes. She couldn't tell the kid to go home and go back to work at the correct times. She let him stay, so she could do nothing and left us short in our shift. She was also the kind of person who would offer me a ride home at night and then drop me off at the gas station that was like a quarter of a mile from my house. Story 59. Medical maintenance here. I didn't see this happen, but I was investigated for it, so I know the deeds. One of our most common tests when doing any sort of maintenance on a piece of medical equipment is an electrical safety test. At its most simplest, it tests whether or not electricity is properly grounded so people don't get shocked. In the lab section of our hospital, we have a machine that was testing over 200. I can't remember the exact number, samples of blood from patients all across the hospital. Well, idiot wanted to get the electrical safety on it done so he could mark it off his list and not have to come back. So he pulls the plug on the machine, tests it, replugs it, turns it on, presses start, and leaves with a big smile of a job well done. Except job not well done because the effer had caused an error on the machine from the sudden loss of power, destroying all the samples. Obviously, an investigation starts and the effer has the audacity to blame me. He even wrote my name down on his notes as if I'd done the work. He had a particular dislike for me because I had informed the hiring manager to not hire this guy, as I personally knew him and knew he was an idiot. I was saved by two very important factors. One, the system keeps a log of who writes what, so it showed that he was logged in when my notes appeared, but he argued I used his computer because I was too lazy to log into mine. Two, I was working nights that week. He was fired on the spot, and he lasted only 3 days in that job. Story 60. We worked on a reaction floor in a facility that grew silicon. Amorphous powder was a waste product that accumulated on reactor components. It is flammable. We would have to put all the components on the wash between growing cycles. On the day in question, the wash was backed up, so 2 filters were stacked near each other on the floor. A filter was about 15 feet tall. This idiot was throwing silicon rocks under the floor scrubber so the scrubber would fling them out. One of these rocks flies at a filter. The impact sparks. The filter goes up in flames. It starts the filter next to it on fire. These 2 filters were stacked next to running reactors. The reactors on one section of floor had to be shut down. The filters were melted by the time the fires were put out. Each filter cost $350,000 plus the loss of product from shutting reactors down. Over $1 million lost, so this idiot could play games. Story 61. I worked for a small SaaS company managing databases for other businesses. After firing the only person who knew how several clients' workflows worked, I was expected to lie to the customers about where their PM was and why crap was effing up. I was thrown under the bus after a networking engineer hosted a demonstration of, let's see what this button does, on the client's production server, because I was the one who noticed after hours and noted on the ticket for him to change crap back ASAP before the client noticed. It took an emotional toll because my direct supervisor really led the charge in throwing me under the bus because she wasn't supposed to be telling me to lie either. And on one conference call I had set up for the client asked what the heck I was doing on the call since I clearly didn't care. In fact, I was the only person who gave a dang, which is why I had requested to attend that call. Funnily enough, the CEO actually pulled me aside for a minute to ask me to snitch, and I said I couldn't. Is it the newly assigned PM? No, man, newly assigned PM can't fire me. Hopefully that should be all the hint you need. He did not appear to get the hint. Within a few months, I was asked to accept severance. As best as I can tell after the fact, my narcissistic boss schemed with our single HR lady to convince everyone I was an alcoholic, which was funny because I went to more than one beer tasting event with coworkers and I usually gave away my beer, while everyone else was daring each other to challenge their use of flowery objectives, and I was the one who was like, yeah, this is 2005 porter taste older than the 2006. It was pure projection, since my boss reported getting drunk every weekend. Told me, I think I would have been good at math if I didn't show up to high school drunk all the time. She was in her late 40s and still bragged about the vodka in the water bottle trick. and I watched her sit and write emails with a growler of beer. Story 62. Kind of a coworker, but more like my replacement. I'm a brewer, and there are a lot of breweries in my area. It's a weird, incestuous community where people bounce around from spot to spot, and we all know each other. I left one brewery and started at another, but I was in a transition period where I was brewing at both. One of the bar staff at my new brewery was looking to get a job in production, so I told him to apply for my old job. He got the job, and I helped train him before switching over permanently. It was part-time, so he was still working the bar at my new job. He started showing up with what looked like chemical burns on his hands, arms, and face. I asked my old boss, and apparently the idiot was filling up the sanitizer bucket with too much chemical, so when he would reach in to grab a part, it would fill his gloves with prussic acid. He was a sweaty guy and wouldn't properly rinse the chemicals off his hands before wiping sweat off his face. The solution was simple. Don't fill the bucket up so much. My boss told him multiple times what to do, but he refused to listen. Needless to say, he is no longer in the industry. Story 63. I was reading all these, and then after a bartender story, I remembered that I have one. I haven't tended bar in close to a decade, but when I did, I had a coworker who was very cute and sweet, but incredibly ditzy. She had 3 F-ups all in a relatively short succession that ultimately resulted in her termination. 1. She dropped an unopened bottle of Patron while restocking, shattering it on the floor. No big deal, crap happens, and this sucked because it came out of her paycheck. 2. She accidentally gave away $100. Someone came and asked for change for $100. She gave them 5 20s, got distracted by their conversation, and never got the $100 bill from them. Probably a scam. I also felt bad for her about this one. 3. The worst one, with absolutely no excuse, our state's Alcohol Beverage Control Authority came to sting us with an underage cadet. She carded this girl, saw that her ID was vertical, not horizontal, commented on it, and served her anyways. She was fired on the spot that day, fined $500 by the state, and the restaurant was fined $1,500. Ouch. Story 64. Worked at a Wendy's for a bit. We had this kid in there with a work permit, so he worked like 4 hours at a time or so. On his first week, he spent an entire 4-hour shift literally not charging anyone because he thought they would pay at the next window. None of the customers came forward, of course. We didn't find out till the end of his shift when his drawer was short like hundreds of dollars. Surprisingly, he wasn't fired or anything, but the manager started watching him on all his shifts after that. Similar story. I worked at a Family Dollar during a holiday season, so we made a few hundred per hour. The managers had to constantly drop our drawers. When the amount of money per drawer gets too high, they have to do a drop, taking the money and moving it to the safe. You keep 100 to 200 in your drawer, and when it goes over, you put the excess under the drawer for the managers to grab later. We'd been at this for hours, and at one point I stepped away from my register to do other things. I came back and continued ringing people out. About an hour later, the manager came by and counted me about $500 short. I swallowed my heart. I knew I didn't take it, but I was terrified because if my drawer was that short, they would take it from my check anyway and possibly fire me under suspicion of theft. For about an hour, I was inconsolable. I was also 8 months pregnant, so hormones plus panic, not a great mix. The assistant manager finally strolls in and asks, "What's up?" That's when she revealed she had dropped my drawer when I stepped away, and then left the building with all the cash to take it to the bank because we'd gone over a certain amount for the day. She just hasn't bothered to tell anyone. Huge no-no. Can't just dip with a couple $1,000s and not tell anybody. In her defense, it had been a hectic season with having to do like 30 drops a day. Some things fall through the cracks. It is what it is. I was just upset thinking I'd be jobless and short on my pay. Okay, I have one more. This happened before I started the job. The owner's son of a daycare center was asked to fix a broken fridge, and he had one of the 10-year-olds go behind it to help him. Moron. The kid ended up hurting himself on something back there and needed stitches. The owner's son was permanently banned from entering the grounds, but would regularly show up anyways and act like he was the boss. I couldn't stand this guy. Story 65. I was a store manager at Kmart, and we did Western Union. There was a rash of scammers calling up service desks and convincing them they were from the security or IT or somewhere, and would name drop the DM or the SM to get them to process a Western Union and send thousands of test dollars somewhere. Problem is, once you click that button, regardless if the person in the store has paid that money, is gone to the other location. There was extensive focus on it, as in southern Wisconsin alone, they had scammed over $50,000 of our different stores. There had been an attempt on my store, but the service desk person hung up on them immediately. I had a completely inept ASM who had been with the company forever. She also had no clue about technology, especially Western Union. Despite training her multiple times, if she was ever up there and someone wanted to send money, she'd just tell them it wasn't working, so she didn't have to do it. One of my service desk girls, who was 16 or so, I think, gets the scam call. She immediately gives the phone to this ASM as she's been trained to do. The company has literally started firing everyone who has done these because they kept doing them. It's that hardcore now. This ASM then proceeds to process the scam Western Union for $30,000. My 16-year-old service desk girl, bless her, kept whispering to the ASM, "Are you sure we're supposed to be doing this? We were told not to do any of these over the phone." Which the ASM just says, "Well, they said the SM approved it." She gets to the last screen before you send it, and finally it kicks in with her. She asks the person on the phone if she's sure she should do this, and the person just hung up on her. Not knowing what else to do, like close the screen, cancel the order, anything, the ASM just pulls the plug out of the wall on the computer. I demoted her like 2 months later, but still, come on. Story 66. When I was in clinicals as a student in nuclear medicine technology, the tech that I was supposed to be learning from gave a 20 MCI dose of TC99M metronate to a patient that should have received a 2 MCI dose of TC99M mebrofenin. For the layman, this person gave a patient 10 times the dose of radiation and ruined a procedure by giving a pharmaceutical used for imaging bones with the patient was there to have a scan and function test of their gallbladder. Not to mention that patient was radioactive for a longer period of time and had to receive an extra dose of radiation to get the procedure done correctly later on. Basically, the number one rule in nuclear medicine is limit the radiation to only what is needed to get a successful image. I definitely learned a lesson about making sure I knew what radiopharmaceuticals I was giving that day. I never saw that tech again. Story 67. I worked as a home health aide for a few years. One client and I really clicked, so I soon became his head nurse while my coworkers took over night shifts and days that I was unable to work. I had an older female coworker that had been with the company for nearly 20 years and believed she knew everything, and while she was incredibly knowledgeable, she clearly couldn't do everything by herself. One day I came in, did my normal rounds while the client was asleep, and noticed that his med box had been moved and the amount of pills were all wrong. I was the only homemade with permission to refill his med box, so I called his daughter and asked her about it. The daughter hadn't touched it. I looked at our binder to see who had worked the last shift and to see if they'd mentioned his meds. Lo and behold, it was the older woman. I took a picture of her report, the med box as it was, and his list of current meds and sent it to our office. After going through the meds and their dosages, I couldn't believe what had been done. Certain pills were almost double or triple their dosage and others were low. If we had not noticed and given those meds to him as they were, it would have killed him. We would have had a massive lawsuit on our hands, and I would have lost my favorite client. The next day was my day off, but I got called into our main office, which was unusual. I figured that they just wanted to talk to me about the meds and made sure I corrected them. Turns out that this was not the older coworker's first time doing something like this, though, and that she was on probation from her last close call. They ended up firing her, and she had to be dragged out of the building by both security and police after she nearly attacked me. My client and his daughter were forced to get a restraining order on her after she showed up to his home several times while probably looking for me. It was scary, but I ended up moving to a new state shortly after. Story 68. Worked at a Jack in the Box for 2 years as a manager, and of all the things I've seen, this was the dumbest. One guy we had, Marty, great kid, but had developmental issues. Still, the guy worked his butt off and learned the job. So when I say this is the dumbest, I'm not trying to knock the guy because even he realized it was a mistake. Jack is your typical fast food place for those that haven't heard of it. One of your most popular items are the tacos. They're 2 for $1. You deep fry them for about a minute, toss lettuce, cheese, and sauce, and they're good to go. Of course, everyone ordered them, and because they were cheap, people ordered a ton of them. Standing at the taco station waiting on Marty, and he pulls a rack of tacos out and drops them on the stand to make. One slips and falls into the fryer. Without hesitation, he reaches into the bottom and grabbed the taco. It happened so quick, I was stunned. Our conversation went something like this. "Holy crap, man, did you just reach in that fryer?" "Yeah, that was dumb." He held his hand up and it was beet red. I make him hold it in ice water immediately. I told him he needed to go to the hospital and let them look at it. He absolutely refused and wanted to work, and so he did. He worked his entire shift and wore gloves the rest of the time. That dang Marty was tough. Still, the stupidest thing I've ever seen a coworker do. The allegiance to that Jack in the Box shift is insane. How impressive. Guys, in a sea of bad employees that aren't committed to the job, be a Marty. Be a Marty! Actually, you know what? Don't be a Marty. You know, he did stick his hand in the freaking fryer. And also, don't prioritize the job over your health. I was wrong, okay? Don't be a Marty. Just, work hard. Story 69. Not quite a coworker, but I hope this counts. I imported a Volvo from Europe. After driving it around for a while, went to the Volvo dealership to pick it up. part of the paperwork they had me sign was one that only had 2 boxes, one that said the odometer was broken, and the other that said the odometer had been tampered with. Both of these are terrible and neither applied to my nearly brand new car, but the guy assured me that the DMV required this form just as a matter of course. Just pick one, it didn't really matter, huh? Stepped outside and called the DMV, and the guy I talked to laughed. Why would you sign such a paper if it wasn't true? You'll never be able to sell it if nobody can be sure of the mileage, and once it's in the DMV computer, you'll never get it out, man. The Volvo guy blanched when I told him. Turns out he'd been doing this job for nearly 10 years, and he'd always told people it was necessary. God knows how many people he'd shanked, hundreds certainly, for nothing. Story 70. I used to work at a major aircraft engine manufacturer. Prior to shipping engines to our customers, they would each be tested to ensure no defects. I would then review the test results and decide whether the engine was good to ship or we needed to make adjustments. We had a senior tech, call him Chuck, who had been around forever. This guy had developed a very poor know-it-all attitude. Aviation, whether it be actual flying, manufacturing, or maintenance, is a very controlled and regimented environment. People with this kind of disposition are generally a huge problem. Our company had recently implemented new SOPs to further control possible mistakes and limiting unfavorable processes. Well, as you can guess, this did not sit well with our protagonist. Chuck would constantly female dog about how he didn't need some young buck engineer with no hair on his chest to tell me how to do my job. He'd been doing this for years. He didn't need to waste time doing these new silly checklists that he hadn't even heard of before. These new rules were just a hindrance to Chuck. Well, one day, our brave hero rigged up an engine in the test cell and didn't bother with the last few items on his checklist involving cleaning up the work area. Well, this genius forgot some steps and wasn't thorough in his cleanup. Barely 30 seconds into the test, a loud crash is heard accompanied by crunching and grinding noises. This grizzled genius forgot a flashlight in the test cell, which promptly got ingested and wrecked the entire engine. So the test is brought to an emergency stop. Well, at this point, our hero panics and enters defensive mode. After chiding his crew for not checking on him, he decides to redeem himself by starting the engine teardown and cleaning everything up. This is all taking place during the night shift, mind you, and as such, he is the most senior person around. I'm guessing his hurried attempts to tear the engine down and start inspections were an attempt to offset his major F-up. Well, in his hurry, Chucky again decides that SOPs are not applicable to him as he directs his crew. As the teardown is taking place, one of the junior members of the crew is asked to discard the oil and other fluids that has been drained in the teardown. Well, this member is extremely new and basically still undergoing his initial training. He mentioned that he had never done this before and that he felt uncomfortable performing this task without supervision. Once again showing his stellar judgment, the Chuckster yells at the young kid and just sends him off without any backup or supervision. The junior tech heads off and disposes of the oil. The crew secures the wrecked engine. Everyone was pretty tense after this event, and our SOPs dictated that the line should be shut down for the evening after this sort of outcome. Again, I suspect Chuck wanted to make some sort of amends for this issue and was worried about how he would delay the assembly of the engines for the rest of the night. Our company was already running behind on scheduled deliveries. So at this point, he gets the evening crew to restart their duties. Well, as morning approaches, another engine is ready to be run through the test cell. So it's rigged up in another test cell and off we go. Almost immediately, a chip light goes off, indicating that there is metal contamination in the oil of this engine. Guess what? The novice tech that went to dispose of the oil from the wrecked engine didn't know proper procedure and he accidentally dumped it into the good oil supply. His supervisor never followed up on him and then used the good oil in the new engine, which was damaged in the process. So that's how El Chuckarino wrecked 2 engines in one night. I've only had to let a few people go in my life. Every time I feel sick to my stomach having to tell someone that they're going to lose their employment. And this is the only time I've had zero problem to tell Chuck, head for the exit. You know, I know Chuck was in the wrong, but something about the little Chuckarino nicknames he kept giving him kind of, personified it. It grounded it. So I feel like I know Chuck. I should be rooting for Chuck. But Chuck was kind of a douche, I'm glad he got let go. Story 71. It was a quiet night without many calls when one officer believed he spotted a drunk driver in a parking lot. He attempted to conduct a traffic stop, but the car kept driving. He gets on the radio, all riled up that he has an eluding suspect. Since there's nothing else going on, a bunch of units converge on a scene and stop the driver. Upon getting to the window, it's clear the man is highly intoxicated. He hadn't gone very far either, just doing laps around the parking lot. He was otherwise cooperative, so we asked why he didn't stop for the officer. The reply, I didn't see a police officer. All I saw was that train right there. All at once, everyone turns to look back at the first officer's car and realize that he had turned on the wrong lights. Instead of turning on his overhead lights, he had flipped on his spotlight, which just shone one large yellow light on the side of his car. In his drunken stupor, the driver saw one giant light beam in his rearview mirror and heard the officer blasting the horn trying to get him to stop, and he thought that a rogue train had left its tracks and was chasing him. So he freaked out and did laps around the parking lot trying to get away. Whoop, whoop, that's the sound of the Polar Express. Story 72. Worked security at a car show when I was in high school. They ran from Friday to Sunday, so we would work 19-hour shifts or more because we were young and making money on the weekends was awesome then. Overnight, one of us would check vendors in and out, who went to the bars and who were leaving to get food. I roll up on a golf cart to the main gate to chit-chat with a friend of mine. I end the conversation and start to drive away. I look back because I hear some chatter happening and my friend let this guy in on foot, which is weird. No one ever just walks in. That, and when I was heading back to the guard shack, I noticed the guy had a Slim Jim in his hand. So I went to my friend and asked what he is doing here. Friend told me he was a contractor who was picking up a car that was sold earlier that day. So at this point, the guy was gone inside and it's dark. So I just looked at him and said, wait, so you let a guy into a car show with millions of dollars worth of cars with a Slim Jim without any second thought? No paperwork, nothing. He said, yeah, he seemed like a good guy. So I called the police and security management, and all of us just waited at the gate for this guy to come around in a high-value old 60s muscle car. Police obviously took it from there after we confirmed that was the guy who walked in. Well, turns out with no surprise to anyone but my friend, the guy was just there to do some car shopping. Stealing. Story 73. Army. Today. Soldier doing inventory and he tries to seat the dummy around inside of the Carl G for storage. $20,000 rocket launcher. Only it won't go in. The guy next to him glances over and says, yeah, there's something in there. Soldier peeks inside and sees the cap of a round. Pulls it out. It's a live HE round from our last training session. $30,000 explosive just chilling in the tube. We finished that mission a month ago and no one noticed. What's worse, we flew back to base with it in the Chinook, and when they checked, sure enough, it was primed. Had anyone else pulled that trigger in the aircraft or arms room, the concussive force of the backblast would have killed everyone before the round even had a chance to explode. The armorer quietly put it in the dungeon lockup until we can sign it back to the bunker for proper storage. Story 74. I co-owned a civil engineering firm / survey outfit. The other owner was out doing explosive work with the military for 2 weeks. He's 2,000 miles away, gleefully blowing up cars to simulate terrorist attacks, while I'm left to run the shop. Arrive at the office Monday morning to several cop cars and the big window in the front of the building missing. Oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, I thought. I approached the building, no alarms, just a trashed office. The lack of alarms is sort of bugging me, so I asked who disarmed it. Employee said he did it when he got there. Cop showed up shortly thereafter. Okay, I head to my office, upside down, check petty cash, all 2,000 gone. Oddly enough, my .44 Magnum revolver still there. Check for my laptop, gone. Alright, that's weird. Many other laptops still in place. Desktop computers still in place. Total stations, 30 to 40K a pop, still in their closet. I'm getting weird vibes from this whole situation. Pick up the phone and it's dead. I try another one, dead. Go outside to the telex box and the lines are ripped out. What the heck is going on? I call the alarm company. They have nothing on their end. Asked the cops. Said they received a call about a break-in, but no alarm. Nothing is adding up here. Call the alarm company back and ask how to get the logs off the main system and start piecing a timeline together. I pull up the logs and see that the alarm never went off until it detected a lost signal on its comms line, and that was a silent alarm about 10 minutes after it was disabled. Code typed in like someone entering the building. I see where this is leading now. The early employee entered the building, disarmed the alarm, stole the petty cash and hid the laptop in the storage locker in the basement, then proceeded to trash the office to look like a break-in, and then ripped out the phone lines thinking it would somehow negate the fact that the alarm never went off for a broken window. I was nervous to accuse the employee of this as I didn't have video of the goings-on, but the cops were sold on the events as I pieced them together. They questioned said employee and he admitted to it pretty quick. Got everything back, took said employee to rehab. Drugs are bad, okay? And I fired him on the spot. Didn't press charges, as being hooked on the hard drugs is a pretty awful thing, and having B&E charges on top of that seemed excessive. Story 75. I'm late to the game, but I'll post anyway. I make deliveries to hospitals using company cars. There are 2 shifts, so C and I would often drive the same car. She left a note with the keys saying Don't drive, oil problems. Since we didn't have extra cars, I had no choice but to drive it anyway. When I started it, a pop-up said, oil change required. She often forgot to fill up on gas. One day I didn't have enough to finish my run and she had taken the gas card home with her. I trained her on my route on a Friday. The following Monday, she didn't have a clue where to go or how to get there. Once, she got so lost in a hospital that she entered a room on a naked person in the middle of changing clothes. Twice she asked me if I missed Omaha. I've never been to Nebraska. I grew up in Oklahoma. Because COVID, we have to take our temperature. She repeatedly wrote down low. She was consistently late. Instead of calling work directly to let us know she was on her way, she would call one of the other drivers on his cell phone. Story 76. Probably get buried by now, but designer was at a client's house during a site visit with us. Probably will get buried by now, but designer was at a client's house during a site visit with us, 2 installers, a while back. After inspecting our work, we went outside where the designer proceeded to talk some mad crap about the clients and their living arrangements, saying how dirty they are, how gross their house is, and how big of a dumb stoner the husband client is, and how he sits around all day just smoking weed and playing guitar. Her phone had butt dialed the client, and the entire thing was being recorded to the wife client's voicemail. The whole time the designer was going off, the other installer and I were just patiently listening and waiting for her to leave. She is a known crap talker. About an hour later, we got a call from the general manager about what had happened while we're still working at the same client's home, and we had to be there for a few more days. Those next few days were pretty awkward to say the least. Story 77. One of the first jobs I had right after college was in the printing department for this one company. They had this large format printer. I designed the graphics and a coworker ran the machine. He was not the brightest person. The computer that operated the printer was about 15 feet away and had speakers that was playing music. My coworker wanted the speakers to be closer to the printer since he was there most of the time, so he didn't have to turn the volume up too high and hear the music. He bought several of those audio extension cables that he connected the speaker cable to so he can place the speakers on the printer. He started to tape the wires on the wall to make it look nice and neat, but ended up taping the cables directly across one of the 2 entry doors to the printing room. Most people entered the room using the other door, but it was still dumb to run wires right across the other door. I wanted to point out the cable across the door, but wanted to see if he would catch his own mistake. It didn't take more than 5 minutes after the tape job was complete before my boss opened that door to come in, and the speakers ended up swinging out of the printer and smashed onto the floor. My boss looked around trying to figure out what just happened, and all I could do was laugh and point the whole time. Story 78. I work for Asst Living tree experts, so we are constantly working around live power lines. The guy I was working with is a 35-year vet and should know better than when a tree that massive has fallen across the power lines, they should call for an outage. It's too much of a risk that's not worth your life, but for this foreman, it was. He cut the tree in half, with the tension being high, and it completely split onto the primary, which caused it to viciously swing up and down. It made contact with both secondaries and completely blew up in front of us. I was knocked to my feet and went deaf for like a solid 5 minutes. I have no clue how my foreman was still alive, but he popped his head out of the bucket and asked me if I was all right. I was mad because this man's pride almost killed both of us and knocked out the entire neighborhood's power. I'm glad this mistake happened because it was a giant wake-up call to reality that no one but yourself cares about your safety. So you gotta speak up and stand back if you don't have a good feeling about things. Story 79. I worked in a university research lab that did a lot of DNA and RNA work with Drosophila, fruit flies. One summer, we had a visiting researcher in our lab. Nice guy who was great with theoretical stuff, but an absolute disaster in the lab. He had a habit of leaving the stoppers out of fruit fly cultures, which meant we had a lot of 6-legged company in every corner of the lab. One Friday afternoon, I was working on the computer in our adjacent bullpen office, and Bob decided to do RNA extractions at my bench without asking me first. First of all, RNA is a lot more unstable than DNA, so in most labs, RNA work gets at least a dedicated bench, which mine wasn't. Bob proceeded to open an RNA kit and spread it out all over my bench. Then he opened my bottles of sterile water and a few other reagents and spread them out on the bench too. Then he suddenly remembered he needed to get to the airport to catch a 4:30 p.m. flight to his home city for the weekend. I came out of the office and found my bench strewn with kit components and no longer sterile reagents. I had to clean it up and prepare fresh bottles before I could start any new lab work. But did I mention that Tina, an undergrad student from Bob's University, also joined us that summer? I never got to know her well because instead of chatting with us, she was constantly texting while doing DNA extractions. After she and Bob had left at the end of the summer, I tried to run some experiments on her DNA extractions, and the results were all completely flaky. Briefly, every sample looked like it had been taken from 2 fruit flies instead of 1. Our principal investigator, usually a very easygoing guy, got upset with me and told me to run all the samples again, which I did, at the cost of several days and a few $100s in sequencing lab charges. Same results. And it became clear that every one of the samples contained DNA from the same extraneous fruit fly. We never knew exactly what happened, but the most probable explanation was that Texting Tina got distracted and accidentally squirted a load of fruit fly juice into the bottle of buffer used to extract DNA from the other specimens, and either didn't notice or didn't bother telling anyone. These DNA samples came from an experiment that the PI himself had been working on for months. Every one of them was now completely useless. Story 80. A fellow bartender wanted to make a Thai chili pepper tincture for a new drink to be put on the menu. He was young and inexperienced, so I wasn't expecting much, but he was very excited about it. He had all his ingredients and went into the kitchen to get to work. At the same time I went to the back to drop off some dishes. The back is right around the corner from the kitchen. Suddenly I saw a flash of light, and he came running around the corner with his chest on fire and a panicked look on his face. My manager came running in behind him and threw him on the floor trying to smother the flames. It wasn't working, so he reached over and grabbed a dry mop head and started beating him over the head with it. The whole time I was just staring in disbelief by the fish sink, too shocked to realize I'm holding the water sprayer and could have just hosed him down. Apparently, he added Everclear to a hot skillet and it burst into flames. He grabbed the skillet in a panic and the flaming liquor splashed all over him. It smelled like his burnt chest hair in the restaurant all day long. Don't worry, he was just fine. Story 81. I work for a beer company. We had a product issue with packaging that meant our draught beer was arriving with significant product defects, leaking kegs, carbonation issues, etc. To date, it cost us about €1 million replacing stock, write-offs, and other added costs, because some dumb effer thought it would save cost, moving from steel kegs to plastic, one-way shipping, and skimped on the quality of materials. On a call, the new MD of my region suggested we stop selling draught. That represents roughly 45% of our sales for a key brand. I explained that wasn't a realistic option as it would tank the brand, the distribution, and our reputation for the foreseeable future. As it stands, we were able to continue paying to deal with the issue even though it was extremely painful for our budgets in the short term. MD insisted we should trial his idea with half our accounts because people wouldn't care. I insisted this was a scorched earth strategy, and obvious solution was to invest in sufficient stock of steel kegs. He again forced the issue and asked me to proceed with the new strategy. Now angry at the absolute twattery I'm witnessing, and I in no uncertain terms explained that it's the stupidest idea I've ever heard, and that unless he formally puts that in writing, I'm not going to trial as it is not a solution. 2 of the other managers then kindly backed me up on the point, and the matter was dropped. Colossal F-up, which cost us $1 million, almost compounded to cost us double. Story 82. I worked at a delivery service during my undergraduate at college. I got blamed for not filling the gas tank when it was almost empty and grabbing the wrong printer paper. Pre-made holes versus no punch holes. I took the blame for the printer paper because the boxes were the exact same color, but got told, but there are yellow stickers that say 3 punch hole. I asked, where? They looked at them and went, wait, no, there are none. I also explained that I was told never to fill the delivery truck unless it was past half empty. This is 1997, by the way, because it was wasteful. Only twice did I see that happen, and I filled it up right away, put my number to my truck, and signed off on the pump like I was trained to do. They gave me some room on the boxes because someone had not been doing their job. However, they still blamed me on the truck because between the 3 hours I left to go to class and the next deliveries were at the end of the day, and they were done right before night classes, so people weren't making constant trips and wasting supplies and gas. Yet, blamed me not thinking about what happens in those 3 hours. I got the boot the following week, and not even 2 days later they noticed things were still happening. Truck was almost empty. It actually stopped in the parking lot because it was so close to E. Those same boxes were missing the yellow stickers. Found out one of the assistant manager's son was taking the truck out to make emergency deliveries because various places on campus were running out of supplies, and they didn't write down that they took the truck out. Even more stupid, you had to sign out the keys to the truck. Person just saw the guy take the keys and was like, hey, and went back to doing whatever they were doing and let him go. The stickers were on a shelf that was marked on by the same kid who was told, make sure you don't run out of boxes. So he never opened them. He just left them there. The night stock person would check and be like, oh, Guess we don't need to print any. There are full shelves. Not taking notice that they were the same inventory for almost 2 months, and none were moved until I got accused of messing up the boxes and missing the stickers. They looked at my shift, me properly signing out and everything, so they figured it was my fault. After everything hit the fan, the assistant manager was fired, the son was of course fired, and they finally realized it all started because the former student manager, during the end of the day shift, had been filling up the truck at night, checking anything that was out of order. He was a real above and beyond guy who did more work than he was paid to do. He ended up leaving for another job. So when this happened, the manager's kid lost his excuse to hide all the crap he was doing, and I took the fall for all of it. Story 83. Worked at a cemetery and had a dude nearly get arrested. We didn't have uniforms or anything, just wore whatever because you were going to be filthy with dirt and grass every day. This guy went to go clip down some heavy brush with bolt cutters. It's common to use because branches of weeds are a female dog when it gets thick. Thing is, he didn't have any crew around or take a work truck over. So you've got a guy all dirty walking around the neighborhood to get to a part of the cemetery with a pair of bolt cutters. Cops picked him up quick and they had to explain that yes, he was doing exactly what he said he was doing. Same dude took a nap under a work truck during lunch break for the shade. I love that guy. Edit, because of this comment, I drove through the old cemetery yesterday afternoon, ran into the boss man and went to say hi. I brought up working with Andy and it turns out that he passed away some months back. The dude was like 33. I have no clue what happened, but dang, what a turn of events. Guys, just a reminder, stay close with your friends and keep in contact with them. Story 84. Oh, lucky day, I have so many, but here's 3. Worked in a logistics company. Relocation and delivering new furniture to private people or companies. Some time ago, there was this woman working with us. This is usually a man's job because of the heavy furniture. She, however, was weird in many ways, which explains how she ended up there. For one, she was a racist, but the best story about her is the time she got fired. Our company was a crap show. The only good thing was that we could sometimes take the company trucks home with us to move our stuff. The car of the lady was broken down, so she asked for a vehicle for the weekend. He gave her a moving truck. Now bear in mind that this was during Corona time, so she took the truck home and got hungry on the way. She stopped at Burger King, but in the early stages of the pandemic, all restaurants were closed. Only the drive-in was open. It was not uncommon for people to go there by foot since there was no other way. But that would be uncomfortable, I guess. Well, she took the company truck and tried to wiggle her way into the drive-in. She side-slammed the height restriction pole and managed to pierce a gigantic hole through the whole length of the truck's sidewall. Then she backed up and fled the scene without telling anyone. The pole at Burger King was also bent. Well, bad luck. Turns out Burger King got cams installed all throughout the perimeter. My boss then got a call on Monday from Burger King with them saying, "Well, listen, sir, we got a really funny thing caught on our security camera here," and so he ordered her into his office in the afternoon and asked her about the huge hole in the truck. She said, "Must have been the guy that had it before me," and it was already there when she got it. The audacity. The boss man would have maybe given her mercy, but when she lied on top of it, he fired her then and there. Crazy stuff. Another time was when the Spanish guy who couldn't speak a single word of our language was in charge of supplying a school with a new load of chairs and tables. They would all come on wooden pallets. The more experienced guy told him that he should never drag the pallets over the floor, which a lot of people like to do out of comfort, but always carry them or drive them with the cart. He said, yes, yes. Well, of course, he didn't understand a single word, because 5 minutes later, when the older colleague returned, there was the Spanish guy dragging the pallet behind him over the whole length of the school floor. The floor was just freshly made out of linoleum. A huge scratch mark had formed all across the school floor. The older colleague went crazy. Well, in the end, boss man had to pay about 40,000 euro in repair. Guy wasn't even fired after that. Should tell you enough about the old boss man. Also, there was this college student who would only work 1 day a week. We got along well, but I was told that he was rather incompetent. Well, one time he was working with our second most incompetent colleague, and they had to deliver building supplies to new apartments. Our trucks had a ramp on the backside instead of doors, which would open 2 up, so you could drag the pallets with a cart onto the ramp and then hydraulically move the ramp down. The ramp had 2 ranges of movement. It could move up and down and tilt up and down, changing the angle towards the truck's container. So, you see where this is going, I assume? The guy that was working with us for some time loaded the building supplies onto the ramp, a pallet full of paint buckets, white paint, and he told the college guy to lower the ramp while he's holding onto the cart so it doesn't roll off. College guy goes to the remote and presses, you guessed it, the button for tilt instead of down. The other guy notices what's happening while already tilting. He yells at him to stop, stop, what are you doing? And the cart slowly starts rolling off thanks to gravity. So the college guy sees it, panics, and runs toward the ramp to help hold up the pallet, which had almost dropped completely. Fun fact, the pallet weighed about 300 kilograms, so there's no way he's holding it up. Once it started rolling downhill, that was it. What an experienced worker would have done is tilt the ramp back up. But hey, don't hate the player, hate the game. All buckets full of white paint spilled satisfyingly all over the street. The poor guys had to drive back to the company and then return to pick up all the paint. Funny thing is, the same thing happened to the same guys just a few weeks later all over again. To be fair, incompetent workers are usually employed by incompetent companies who struggle to find skilled workers who would actually work under such awful conditions. And for a worker to be unskilled usually means not having had any training. Also, boss's fault. It's a chicken or egg situation, I'd say. Hey, but thank you for listening to my TED Talk. Story 85. We won a large bid with a large customer. Millions. Skinny margins. Afterwards, one of our vendors lowered some of our prices, meaning our margins would improve a few points on some select items. Our product manager, who loves to be the hero, decided to tell the customer that we were going to lower their prices because a vendor lowered the sell price to us. After the bid was complete and awarded, the look on our owner's face was priceless. He made the product manager rescind the lower prices, or he was going to dock his pay until the prices were offset. The guy had never been in sales before and was trying to look good in front of the customer. Of course, I, being in sales all my life, had to sit there and watch the train wreck in slow motion. The customer saying, "Really?" The owner saying, "What?" The product manager saying, "In good faith." Me just sitting there like, what did anyone just say? Last time anyone other than the sales group was allowed to talk pricing to our customers. Story 86. My boss decided to hire a high ropes expert, sight unseen, because she had some supposedly wonderful degree I had never heard of. He brought her in while I was on a week-long expedition and decided she didn't need to demonstrate anything. Big mistake, and number uno. I took a supply run back to camp, saw her running the course. I decided to go say hi. Long story short, she had decided to tie a knot she didn't know after seeing it once and effed it up royally. It was inverted and failed utterly when pressure was applied. Luckily, the girl was small enough that her slight weight pulling the ropes enough to apply friction against themselves held her for like 3/4 of the descent. She only fell about 10 feet, but I can't imagine how stupid and vain you have to be to pretend you know what you are doing when someone's life is on the line. I remember sitting on the ground and shaking for a while after getting the participant set up and safe. Then, lots of yelling. Story 87. Worked at a restaurant with a rich kid who loved just testing the limits. His words, not mine. This particular restaurant had a date night deal that had an appetizer, a couple of entrees, and a dessert. My coworker decided to eat the entire date night deal on our 45-minute break during a double shift. He ate it all, dessert included. About an hour later, I'm on Expo, on the line, and he's serving. Suddenly, I hear a huge amount of splashing. Turns out our dude was vomiting all over the line, not in the trash can behind him. I've never seen so much vomit come out of someone who looks so unbothered about getting to a trash can. We had to yell at him to stop puking into the drain on the floor. He even puked in the lobby area of the restaurant, and our manager lied to customers, saying it was a child's mess. Our manager then proceeded to give him another shirt, clean up the puke, and told him to just get back to work. I quit the week after, and you can bet your butt the health inspector's office knows all about it. Story 88. I was a database owner. I went on vacation. I was accessible the entire time I was on vacation. People did text, call, and email me. They got an autoresponder, but for the most part, I quickly handled any interaction because time had taught me that I would rather put in 5% while on vacation than come back to the monkey screaming and the circus on fire. My boss learned something about the data while I was out of town. So there were 3 measures. Let's call them Bob A, Bob B, and Bob C. They all measure one thing, but in different ways. My database was not new and had been functioning for more than a year. He misinterpreted what he had learned and genuinely thought that Bob B was what we should be reporting. But we were reporting Bob A. Without saying a word to me, he had the vendor pull overtime to change A to B. This cost about $50,000, but this money was very well within our budget. So very big company, very big database. I get back into town. He tells me, genuinely proud of himself, what he has done. I freaked because we totally needed A, so we had to pay another $50,000 to get the vendor to pull overtime to change it back to A. Frankly, our budget was big enough that the money was not the worst part of this. The worst part is that we had to tell thousands of users that if they had pulled reports during approximately a 3-week period that included the Measure Bob, they had to rerun the reports. I actually felt bad for him. He had to kiss so much butt to clear this up with management. This also gives you an idea of why I responded to my coworkers while I was on vacation. I did it to avoid this exact kind of a blankety-blank circus fire. Story 89. Worked as a medication assistant at an assisted living facility. We got a new girl nurse assistant one day who was just really not cutting it, and she constantly lied about really obvious things like, yes, room 303 is all put to bed. And then hours later, I'd go to give medications to 303 and find her in an armchair with a soiled diaper and saying she hadn't seen anyone all day. So one day, this employee takes a patient back to her room after dinner and forgets to switch her oxygen from her portable tank to the unlimited wall supply when she laid in her bed. This means that at some point in the next few hours, her portable tank ran out. So I walked in with medications later and find this woman gray, guppy breathing and incoherent. I quickly noticed the oxygen issue and switched it to the wall supply, radioed for help, and started checking vital signs on her. Well, the new employee walks in and I explain what's going on. She tries to say that she did switch the oxygen over, but admits that it was her that helped the woman to bed after dinner, and this patient was fully dependent. She couldn't have reached the oxygen to switch it herself. It was definitely this employee that forgot. Anyways, this girl sees that this woman is in bad shape and comes over to check a pulse in her wrist. Not necessary because I am already checking her oxygen and a pulse on a finger clip, so she holds her wrist for a while. Evidently couldn't find or feel the pulse. There was definitely a pulse there, and then dramatically drops the patient's hand and says, "She's gone." The patient was still loudly guppy breathing and slightly moving in the bed. I was stunned into silence for about 5 seconds at how stupid this girl was to declare the patient dead while she's clearly still breathing and moving in front of us. Once the paramedics arrived and the patient was shipped to a hospital, I reported the whole thing to management and they made her do more orientation. She never improved though, continued to lie about work getting done, and then she was finally fired. The patient from the oxygen incident was in the ICU for a few days, but she never made it. How are there not like bigger repercussions outside of just being fired for something like this? I mean, she straight up was the cause of her death, is she not? Maybe I'm too dumb and I don't understand. Story 90. I worked as a CNA in an OB department. One of the doctors should have not been a doctor. One day after birth, I had to clean up. I found out the doctor threw all the needles and scissors and scalpels in the blood and waste bucket and then expected me to fish them out. I was trained never to put myself at risk like that, so I refused. I told him to call the doctor in to learn a lesson and get them out himself, or toss it all and let the admin know why. The nurse on duty would not touch it either, but had to write me up for it. I just put my reason on it and made it clear I would never jeopardize myself for any other stupid employee, doctors included. I don't know if they threw it all out or who the daring person was who put their hand in there, but I just know it was not me. Story 91. I have 3 stories all about the same person. She was hired as the assistant to the director of the company. She was about 3 years older than me, but about 25 years dumber. 1. She was instructed to take the company credit card and go buy hot dogs and buns for a small hiring event. She asked how many hot dogs she should buy. They told her about 40. She bought 40 packs of hot dogs, so over 300, and then 3 packs of buns. 2, she and I had been assigned to a project in a satellite office about 2 hours away. We had to take separate vehicles because I'm a mom and had to drop my kids off before getting on the road. It was a 2-day project, and we chose to drive there and back each day. On the first day, she got there and back on her own, no problems. On the second day, she ended up in an entirely different state on her way home because she couldn't remember which direction she went on the interstate and thought GPS was giving her the wrong directions. 3. The CEO asked her to drive across town to take a photo of a competitor's advertisement sign. It was the local CVS, about 5 minutes from the office. Her explicit instructions were, go over to the CVS and take a picture of the competitor's sign so we can see what pay rate he's advertising. When she returned, over an hour later, she proudly showed us the photo she took of the competitor's headquarters building half an hour away. She ignored the first half of the instructions and drove half an hour away, literally passing the CVS where the sign was located, to take a picture of the sign on the side of their headquarters building that had nothing more than the name of the business on it. She was laid off about a month later. Alright guys, that concludes our stories of coworkers' blunders. If you have any fun comments that you would like to make of stories of your own, or perhaps you were the incompetent fellow yourself, feel free to drop them below. And as always, thank you for listening.